Hello, Year 9, and welcome back to Remote Learning, lesson number 4, practicing writing skills. Hashtag, I'm not writing, I'm using creativity to help my brain stay healthy, and that is so true. Okay, creativity and imagination in our writing is really good for getting our brains to stay healthy. And as we've seen from the previous lessons, we've been really zooming in on different elements of the writing. This hasn't been about producing pages and pages of a creative response. It is about really focusing in on this big question: how do I become a better writer? And we're really looking to establish that firm foundation of key skills. We started with thinking intentionally about our readers. What do our readers need rather than what do we want to write? Then we used an image to start to create different linked ideas, imaginative ideas. And we started to put those into a plan and into sentence stems and ideas. Okay, so to get us thinking back today, then I'm going to introduce this new key vocabulary term, panoramic. So it does ask you here to write down the definition. So in a minute, you'll get to pause the screen and just write down the definition. And we're also just going to look at that word used in the sentence. Okay, so panoramic is an adjective, and it says it's a picture or description with a wide view surrounding the observer, a sweeping description, a sweeping picture. So here we go. We're going to see it now used in a descriptive sentence. So something we might use in a creative response. So, as I stood upon the cliff edge, I was captivated by the panoramic view, undulating blankets of heather and gorse that topped the granite guards of rock that fell away into the insatiable sea below, whilst the ominous grey of the clouded sky weighed heavy upon the horizon. So you can see that we've actually used that word that adjective panoramic in a descriptive sense. But as we're going to see in a minute, you can use it in different contexts. Now, you're right, if you're a photographer, you might be familiar with the panoramic, or just very good with your phones, the panoramic option on your phones. So it is a photographer's term as well. It's a way that we describe creating that big sweeping photo. Okay, but a really lovely word for us to just thank today and to take forward and use. So could you just pause the screen a minute and write down the definition? You don't need to write down the example sentence though. Okay, so just get that definition written down. Give you about a minute to get that done. Brilliant. Okay, guys, so hopefully now you've written down panoramic. And we're just going to see it applied in a slightly different context. So if you remember last lesson, we introduced this this reading task to inspire our own writing. So this extract from Truman Capote, In Cold Blood. Now, we want to copy and complete this sentence using the new term panoramic. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through the sentence. I'm going to look at the paragraph again, the text with you again. I'm going to see how we can also use panoramic, not just when we're being descriptive, but when we're actually analysing what writers have done. Okay, so it says here, in the opening paragraph, the writer creates a blank description offering a sweeping account of. So let's just look at the opening paragraph together. The village of Holcomb stands on the high wheat plains of western Kansas, a lonesome area that other Kansans call out there. Some 70 miles east of the Colorado border, the countryside with its hard blue skies and desert clear air has an atmosphere that is rather more far west than Middle West. The local accent is barbed with a prairie twang, a ranch hand nasalness, and the men, many of them, wear narrow frontier trousers, Stetsons, and high-heeled boots with pointed toes. The land is flat and the views are awesomely extensive. Horses, herds of cattle, a white cluster of grain elevators, rising as gracefully as Greek temples, are visible long before a traveller reaches them. So this is the opening paragraph of this extract, and it is beautifully kind of written. It's a very dense description. In other words, there's lots of detail within it. So how could we use the new term panoramic to complete this sentence? In the opening paragraph, the writer creates a description offering a sweeping account of. So I'm just going to ask you to pause the screen there and copy and complete that sentence, challenging yourselves to use panoramic in the right place, and then how would you complete the idea? Okay, and we'll have a little talk about our answers in a minute. Okay, so really, there's only one place we can actually put the term panoramic, but it's really about how we complete the idea. So we ready? In the opening paragraph, the writer creates a panoramic description. Brilliant. So if you've used it there, give it a tick. Okay, offering a sweeping account of. So actually, how would we summarize that opening description? What is the panoramic, the wide view we're given? Brilliant. He gives us a sweeping account of the wheat plains of Kansas. Brilliant. Now, If you'd have said he gives a sweeping account of the village, we're not there yet. Okay, it's not a sweeping account of the village. It's actually the wheat plains, the setting within which we find this village. So actually, this is a lovely example of how writers structure their writing. And a little clue, we're going to do, first of all, in this week, we're going to do our panoramic descriptions. That's what we started to actually plan. Then we're going to look at paragraph 2, and then we're going to look at paragraph 3, following this In Cold Blood by Truman Capote example. So we've got, in the opening paragraph, the writer creates a panoramic description, offering a sweeping account of the landscape of Western Kansas, offering a sweeping account of Western Kansas, the prairie lands, the flat land. So there is variation that you could have brought to that final part of the sentence, but really we're zooming in to summarize there that first paragraph is all about a description, a sweeping account, panoramic description of the landscape. Brilliant. Okay, so what are we going to do next? So now it says we're going to copy and complete these other 2 summary sentences just to remind us of what we read last time. So I'm just going to go through the stems with you, and then we're going to think about how we're going to complete them. So it says, in the next paragraph, the writer shifts our attention as they describe blank in more detail. Finally, the writer changes again, zooming in to describe a blank. So for this one, I'm going to ask you to pause in a minute. Now, if you want, you can stay listening or playing, and I will read the paragraphs again with you. But I'm not going to give any answers away just yet. Or if you prefer to read it to yourself in your own time, you can do it that way. So you need to look at paragraph 2 and 3 again, and then copy and complete the summary sentences. All right, lovelies, off we go. So if you want to stay with me, I'm just going to read to you paragraph 2 and 3. As I read, think, well, in paragraph 2, the next paragraph, what does the writer shift our attention to? What are they describing? So it's changing from a panoramic description of the landscape to something else. What is it? And then finally, the writer changes focus again, zooming in to describe what. So what's being described in the third and final paragraph. Okay, Holcombe 2 can be seen from great distances. Not that there's much to see, simply an aimless congregation of buildings divided in the centre by the mainline tracks of the Santa Fe Railroad, a haphazard hamlet bound on the south by a brown stretch of the pronounced Arkansas River, on the north by a highway, Route 50, and on the east and west by prairie lands and wheat fields. After rain or when snowfalls thaw, the streets, unnamed, unshaded, unpaved, turn from the thickest dust into the direst mud. At one end of the town stands a stark old stucco structure, the roof of which supports an electric sign Dance, but the dancing is ceased and the advertisement has been dark for several years. Nearby is another building with an irrelevant sign, this one in flaking gold on a dirty window, Holcombe Bank. The bank closed in 1933, and its former counting rooms have been converted into apartments. It is one of the town's 2 apartment houses, the second being a ramshackle mansion known, because a good part of the local school's faculty lives there, is the Teacherage. But the majority of Holcombe homes are 1-story frame affairs with front porches. So guys, we've gone from the panoramic description of the landscape to what in this paragraph? How would you complete that sentence? Okay, so just have a little think and fill in that one. Now, our final paragraph, much shorter, but what's the writer changing our focus to? What do they zoom in to describe in this paragraph? So down by the depot, the postmistress, a gaunt woman who wears a rawhide jacket and denims and cowboy boots, presides over a falling apart post office. The depot itself, with its peeling sulphur-coloured paint, is equally melancholy. The chief, the super chief, and the air captain go by every day. But these celebrated expresses never pause there. No passenger trains do, only an occasional freight. Okay, so what can we say then? Let's have a little think. So in the next paragraph, the writer shifts our attention as they describe in more detail. Okay, so what are we getting more details about? The actual village of Holcombe itself. Brilliant. So we get this physical description of Holcombe, the description of the town, how it's laid out, the buildings within it, and the definite emerging sense it's kind of neglect. And sadly, kind of this unnamed, unshaded, unpaved, uncared for town. Brilliant. There's a sense that it's neglected, that it's isolated, that it's been kind of left to rot and become run down, that it's disused and uncared for. It's a lovely description. Okay, and then finally, what does the writer change focus to in that final paragraph? Brilliant. You get it? It zooms in to describe the postmistress, to actually focus on describing a person. So you get this lovely three-stage kind of like camera movement. If you imagine visualizing this with a film camera, we've got the panoramic description of that opening paragraph, then we're zooming into the town and the village itself, and then we get this close-up on a character. It's a really lovely technique that this writer's used. Brilliant. Okay, so that's thinking about what this writer's doing, again, to inspire some of our choices today. But now we're going to just start thinking about our own writing. Now, we did work last lesson on these idea of appositives, okay? And a positive, which comes after a noun, it renames a noun, it explains a noun in more detail. So I just want to quickly check in with us and see if we can identify the appositive in this sentence. So guys, can you find the appositive that explains the wheat plains more fully? So the village of Holcombe stands on the high wheat plains of western Kansas, a lonesome area that other Kansans call out there. So guys, just have a little look through that sentence for yourselves. Make a note of the appositive, and then we'll see if you're right. Did you get it? Okay, so here's our appositive, a lonesome area that other Kansans call out there, a lonesome area. Brilliant. That's our appositive. Now, we've got our own plans. Brilliant. We've done this. There's just a little recap on where we're at. We took those plans and we finished last lesson writing our own description, our own series of sentences that we're using appositives. And mine looked a little something like this. In the beginning, my eye is drawn to the expanse of the sky, a blue blanket tucked in tight against the horizon. Next, my eye goes to the wheat, a swathe of golden cereal that ripples like the sea. In the end, the house, a worn and weathered building, is cast adrift in the sea. So that was my sample writing from last lesson where we started to use the appositives, but we don't want to finish there. We never do. So we're going to look then at developing our sentence level writing to become even more amazing. So we can tick off appositives. Okay, we've got 3 sentences that have begun to describe the image using appositives, which are an amazing way to add information and complexity. Today, we're going to look to tick off subordinating conjunctions and different sentence types. Okay, so a subordinating conjunction is a word or words used to connect 2 clauses together. Words such as although, because, or when. A subordinating clause is a part of a sentence that adds additional information to the main clause. A subordinating conjunction is simply the word or words that is used to join a subordinating clause to another clause or sentence. Okay, so this is what we're going to think about using in our writing. Now, examiners like to celebrate what they call complexity, using complex sentences because they believe it's a reflection of complex ideas and descriptions. And subordinating conjunctions, a variety of these, is a cheat, a kind of shortcut to demonstrating complexity in your writing. Now, in terms of subordinating conjunctions, there is an awful lot of them. The other side, the coordinated conjunctions, are actually limited. We're not looking at those today, but there's only 4 of those: and, but, so, or. But with subordinating conjunction, there is huge variety. Look at our bank over here: after, although, how, if. So when we start thinking about using subordinating conjunctions, you actually have a large bank of ideas to draw upon. Okay, so in a minute, I'm just going to ask you to pause and just to write down the first element of our definition. So I just want you to write down the first purple sentence. The subordinating conjunctions is a word or words used to connect 2 clauses together. Words such as although, because, or when. Okay, lovelies? Brilliant. So just give yourselves a minute to write that down, and then we're going to do some activities to help practice. Okay, so in these 2 sentences, now it does say here circle the subordinate conjunction in each. If you don't want to write the whole sentence out so you circle it, you can list or write down the subordinating conjunction. Okay, so as I read it to you, here's our little bank to the side of subordinate conjunctions, a bit like subordinate conjunction bingo. If I read one of these words, circle it. Okay, here we go. The village of Holcombe stands on the high wheat plains of western Kansas, a lonesome area that other Kansans call out there. Brilliant. Did you get it? Yes, it's the word that. There you go. That is our subordinating conjunction. Okay, so we circle that. That just shows subordinating conjunction in use. What about this one? After rain or when snow falls thaw, The streets, unnamed, unshaded, unpaved, turn from the thickest dust into the direst mud. Brilliant. It's here we've got it at the beginning of the sentence after. So what we can see also about subordinate conjunctions, they can sometimes be used within sentences. So that is being used within the sentence or after at the beginning of the sentence. But what they immediately do is create links between dependent and independent ideas. Okay, brilliant. So we can spot them. Let's see if we can do this one then. So for this activity, you're going to need to pause the screen for this one, okay? Because you need to match the subordinate clause to the best idea. So in purple, we've got the subordinate clauses, and you've got to decide out of the red, which is the best match, which subordinate clause, which clause does it need to be attached to? Now, this is because we've got to be aware that sometimes with subordinating clauses, it's not just enough to simply say, I'm going to use the word after. We have to make sure that it's being used to link two connected ideas, ideas that have a relationship. They can't be random ideas, they have to be related. So our subordinating clauses are, after the sky cleared, although the wheat resisted the wind, as far as the horizon stretched, whenever the sun retreated, and until the clouds burst. And in all of these, look, we've got our subordinate conjunction in the initial position, in other words, at the beginning of the sentence. Okay, but what are they going to be matched with then? So after the sky cleared, it couldn't resist the thresher's blade. The shadows advanced forward. They carried the weight of the rain. The harvest could begin, marked the boundary of the plains. Now, with some of them, there could be a choice between two, and you're going to have to decide. Some of them, it's elimination. It just doesn't work. So after the sky cleared, it couldn't resist the thresher's blade. It just doesn't work, does it? So those two aren't a match. So you're going to look to see how you would match, or which, subordinating clause you would match with which main clause. In other words, you're going to create 5 complex sentences using these subordinating conjunctions. Okay, guys, so just press pause, take your time, and match your subordinating clauses with your main. Okay, guys, are we ready to see? So let's have a little look then. So after the sky cleared, give yourself a tick if you're right, the harvest could begin. Now, again, that reminds us that we're talking about mid-September. We got this information last week. We're in Kansas, in the wheat plains. Harvest begins in mid-September. And we would assume that you need a clear day to harvest. So after the sky cleared, the harvest could begin. Brilliant. Although the wheat resisted the wind, there you go. It couldn't resist the thresher's blade. So sometimes you can use what we call the purposeful repetition of keywords to link clauses. So although the wheat resisted the wind, it couldn't resist the thresher's blade. Brilliant. As far as the horizon stretched, marked the boundary of the plains. Brilliant. Whenever the sun retreated, the shadows advanced forward. Now, this is a lovely moment of antithesis, of opposites, retreat and advance. Quite a military metaphor in this sentence. But whenever the sun retreated, that means to go back, the shadows advance. This lovely kind of interplay between shadows and sun. Until the clouds burst, they carried the weight of the rain. Brilliant. So if you got those matched correctly, brilliant. Give yourself a 5 out of 5. So we are now going to revise our writing, which means we're going to look at what we wrote last week, and we're going to ensure that we revise it to include now some subordinate conjunctions. So last lesson, remember, we wrote 3 sentences to describe the image, and hopefully, because you were following the instructions, they included some impositives, and you may have used subordinate conjunctions without realizing it. But this time, I want us to be intentional. We're going to look at what we wrote last lesson, and we're going to rewrite it, or rewrite at least one sentence to use a subordinating conjunction at the start. Now, that I would love for you to be thinking about is that your work begins to look like this, that we actually begin to show evidence of revision. Okay, revision means to revise, to go back to our writing to make it better. So I know it gets a little bit messy on the screen, but bear with me. This is what revision looks like. It looks like change. So in the beginning, my eye is drawn to the expanse of the sky. Now I've crossed out the in the beginning, and I've chosen from my subordinate conjunction bank while. So I'm using a subordinate conjunction. So while waiting, my eye is drawn to the expanse of sky, a blue blanket tucked in tight against the horizon. Brilliant. Now, you could do it in other ways. After they arrived in Kansas, their eye was drawn to the expanse of sky, a blue blanket tucked in tight against the horizon. But you can see here that we've got that subordinate conjunction. Brilliant. Now, as you're beginning to look at your writing from last lesson, we want to see those subordinate conjunctions, but there might be other things that you decide to change. Okay, so while waiting, my eye is drawn to the expanse of the sky, a blue blanket tucked in tight against the horizon. Now I've added another coordinate conjunction. As the blue horizon turns to gold, the wheat, a swathe of golden cereal, ripples like the sea. Now I've begun to make some changes there in other ways. Now, in the end, the house, a worn and weathered building, appears like a boat cast adrift in the sea, becomes until the house, a worn and weathered building, appears like a boat cast adrift in the sea. So at this point, guys, you should have time and give yourself time to write a description. And you can see how we're actually beginning without having the word when we started last week, but we have the word now to create that panoramic landscape description, like Truman Capote's first paragraph. Okay, so I just want to give yourself time to press pause and work your sentences to include those subordinate conjunctions. Okay, year 9. So actually, this is a good moment just to remind you, if you've sat there and redrafted or sat there and done nothing, is that this is the new level of accountability. So although there will be a final outcome, which is your written kind of final draft and description, that you still need to be sharing with your teacher evidence of your work. So this is the sort of example, this draft that you can take a photo of and send to your teacher so they can just see that you are following and engage with the work. Every student will be given a recorded number that reflects their engagement on a grade of 1 to 3, and that will then trigger either lots of copious amounts of rewards or a little chain of consequences, because it's so important that you are engaging and learning. Okay, so at this stage, this is not our final draft, but we are revising, building our sentences, our description up to the place where we are going to have a final paragraph that we can submit at the end of this lesson. Okay, so brilliant. So we've made some changes. We are now intentionally writing to include appositives and subordinating conjunctions. Okay, guys, but in the words of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I don't want to give you a check for a positive subordinate conjunctions. I want to give you something better. So don't hand it in just yet, because what we also then want to do is intentionally look to create variety by using different sentence types. So we are creating information and complexity in our description by using appositives. We are creating variety and complexity through subordinate conjunctions, and we're going to create further degrees of variety by thinking about different sentence types. Now, we're going to look at these 4 sentence types, okay? So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to pause and write this down, that there are 4 different sentence functions and types. So number 1, question. So there are sentences that pose questions. There are commands, sentences that begin with verbs and give a clear instruction and command. There are statements, which are sentences that give information and description. And there is exclamations, sentences that show that heightened emotion. Now, this is deliberately building on some of the work you would have seen with the Greek tragedy unit, where we recognize that Sophocles, in that soliloquy of suffering, used an awful lot of the exclamations to show the heightened emotion of Oedipus at the scene of his suffering. We saw some of the elements of the questioning. So we have seen these sentence types before. So we have probably written in our description so far mainly statements. So we have used sentences that give information and description. But we can intentionally also plan to create a bit of variety by trying to maybe use questions, commands, and exclamations. So just as a quick recap. So let's have a look at this statement. Holcombe too can be seen from great distances. So it's a reminder then that statements end in full stops. Okay, there's our full stop. And it's a way in which we provide information and description. Brilliant. Now, questions. So these are sentences that pose questions. So we can take our original starting statement, Holcombe too can be seen from great distances, and we can rephrase it as a question. Can Holcombe be seen from great distances? So a question is denoted by the question mark punctuation and the question stem can. Okay, exclamations. Holcomb! It too can be seen from great distances. So sometimes we think that it is harder to use exclamations in naturally descriptive writing. We tend to reserve them maybe if we were doing speech or dialogue, or as we saw with the soliloquy, if we're deliberately creating the voice of a character who is full of heightened emotion. So it feels sometimes unnatural to use exclamations in descriptive writing, which is why they don't occur very often. But if you were describing within a bigger landscape, bigger panoramic description, a change in weather, that can sometimes be signified as a dramatic change. You can use your exclamatory. Okay, so Holcomb too can be seen from great distances. Can Holcomb be seen from great distances? Holcomb, it too can be seen from great distances. So you can hear the changing tone of your writing coming through your sentence types. Now, we're going to revise our writing one last time for today. Okay, and we're going to begin our description with a question that's going to lead into our first sentence. So this is a surefire cheat to include different sentence types. If you begin any descriptive piece of writing with a question that you then answer in the next sentence, you've got variation. Okay, ready to see it in action? So can you imagine the vast loneliness of the Kansas wheat plains? So can you questions are a really they are a cheat. I'm not saying you have to use this type of question for your writing. You have freedom to be more creative. But we've got a can you imagine the vast loneliness of the Kansas wheat plains? You could have asked her, have you ever been to the Kansas wheat plains? Yeah. What do you think the vast so what do you think the Kansas wheat plains are like? So our cheat is we are going to begin our description with a sentence that asks a question. We're going to begin with a question. How you phrase and frame that question is going to be up to you. Now, you can also see that I'm beginning to change and challenge myself to also think about my vocabulary. So can you imagine the vast loneliness of the Kansas wheat plains? Whilst your eye is drawn to the expanse of the sky, a blue blanket tucked in tight against the horizon. Sorry, whilst watching, your eye is drawn to the expanse of the sky, a blue blanket tucked in tight against the horizon. As the blue horizon turns to gold, the wheat, a swathe of golden cereal, ripples like the sea, until the house, a worn and weathered building, appears like a boat cast adrift. So I've changed some words again. I've been thinking about my choices. So I have got now a piece of descriptive writing, a panoramic description of the landscape that uses the positives, subordinate conjunctions, and sentence types. And your final task then, and this is what I would like you to submit to your teachers today, guys, okay? So that's a really clear instruction there. This paragraph is going to be submitted. So we are now revising and rewriting your 4 sentences to provide the best crafted panoramic description you can. Okay, so this is our opening paragraph. We've got 2 more to do this week. Okay, and you can see the pattern. We're going to follow the Truman Capote example. We're going to do a place, and then from a place we are going to describe a person. Okay, so you now have to revise and rewrite your 4 sentences to provide the best crafted description you can. There is a vocabulary challenge here. These were some of the new words we've looked at earlier. Glassy, irrevocably, sinister, inexplicable. So some of those words, panoramic itself. So there's a challenge here to use vocabulary. And you are now going to give yourself the rest of this lesson time to really create your final version, ready to be submitted to your teacher. So this paragraph will be rewarded with kudos points. So you must email it to your teacher or take a screenshot and submit it on Show My Homework. So happy writing. Now, guys, in the big picture of things, you are looking at writing only about 4 to 5 really well-crafted sentences using our positive, subordinate conjunctions and sentence types. So this is what we're looking forward to seeing. Okay, guys, have a really good day. Speak to you tomorrow.